so feel free. Alyssa is also going to be managing the chat during the presentation. And so if you have questions along the way or need clarification, feel free to enter your question in the chat. And if I can or notice it, I will try to kind of stop and answer as well. You can access these slides, and Alyssa, if you could, yeah, there she's on it. You can access these slides. These are provided by Google, or they're Google slides, so you can access them online. The link will stay active or live indefinitely so that you can always refer back to them. And we also have live links throughout the presentation. So we want to make sure that you can access them as you need, especially with additional resources. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. This presentation is just covering in-text citation, although I have just a very short introduction to APA and an overview of some of the changes that were implemented from the 6th edition to the 7th edition. Again, this workshop is focusing on the 7th edition formatting for in-text citations. And then at the end, we just have an activity so you can kind of quiz yourself, test yourself to see how you retain the information that's presented in today's presentation and workshop. And of course, we'll take questions. I can take questions throughout the presentation, or we also have a question time allotted for the end. So just a little bit of an overview for the APA manual. It's published by the American Psychological Association, so we call it APA for short. The most recent edition, the 7th, was published in 2019, the fall of 2019, and there hadn't been a new edition since 2010. So the hope is that, like, you know, this isn't something that they do on a regular basis. It had been about 10 years. We'd seen a really big change in publication, especially with online access and electronic resources. And so a lot of the changes kind of relate to making accommodations for varying resource types, from the traditional like book, article, newspaper, and then maybe multimedia format. So we'll be going over, again, just in-text citations, so it shouldn't matter by the resource type, but you know, those were impacted with the most recent publication. This format is most often used by the sciences and social sciences disciplines. So we see students across the board using APA, as well as publications in those disciplines, typically requiring APA for publication. So the APA manual sets the rules for how to format your paper. This comes down to things like page location, title page, also how to format your sources. So that's where we talk about in-text citations and references. And then also how information is presented. So tables, ethical reporting, trying to reduce bias in language, and then just general mechanics of style. And so largely the objective is to provide structure in the formatting for manuscript publishing, but the new edition actually does account for academic and student works. I don't have the, they actually have an additional like companion publication to the official APA publication manual, and it is geared towards students. And so I understand for academic purposes, it is a really good resource. I just have the like official one. So it talks both about formatting for publication, as well as it delves into some of the differences with academic works. So one of the changes with the newest edition of APA is that they've changed some of the text formatting. So one change has been they have specified that you should only have one space after a period. This has been really hard for me because I'm so used to at the end of a sentence doing 2 spaces. So that's definitely one of the hardest things that I've had to remind myself to do when trying to follow APA formatting. But it has also allowed more flexibility regarding your font options, especially taking into consideration if this the document that you're working on, how it's going to be distributed, whether it's going to be online or electronic resource versus print. We find that, you know, with reading different fonts are easier to read in those different formats. So for online, it's sans serif versus for print, it's serif. Also for figure images, they recommend sans serif and between the sizes 8 and 14. And then they do also specify computer code, which I am not familiar with, and at least I have not had to format it yet, but I could probably format computer code in a reference. So fingers crossed I avoid that for as long as possible. The next slide covers some additional format changes. So student papers no longer need to provide a running head throughout the paper. A running head usually included the title and then of the work, or an abbreviated title. That's no longer necessary, although you do still need to include page numbers in the upper right-hand corner. I've provided a link to APA's website, and it has additional information about running head. So what it would look like in a publication manuscript versus what it, not having to include it for an academic research paper. Headings have also been updated. It's kind of more consistent. So for the most part, it's always bold font. The centering versus left alignment or indented varies depending on the level of the heading, but it is at least consistent that you're using title case throughout the different headings. And so that is another change from the previous edition. So we're going to jump into formatting in-text citations, which is the bulk of what this presentation and workshop is going to be about. So Alyssa did a really great presentation on avoiding plagiarism. And we have those workshop recordings posted online, but this kind of reemphasizes some of the content she covered. So with the purpose of citations is that you're trying to give proper credit to the authors of the information you use. By not including citations, it is considered plagiarism. Part of showing where your sources and information is coming from, it shows how you are engaging in the scholarly conversation of your topic. It builds a foundation for your knowledge and the conclusions that you're coming to. So it's really important to acknowledge these sources. Additionally, it allows the reader to refer back to the original source. And this is something I often talk to students about when they're conducting their own research, is looking at the sources that authors are using once they do find research materials that fit their needs. It's kind of the same idea of like the backwards engineering is if someone were to read your paper, whether it's an academic paper or a published article or some other kind of publication, it would allow the reader to access the sources that you originally used to gather your information, see it in full context, and then maybe incorporate it into their own research. Another thing that Alyssa was able to kind of go into more in depth in her plagiarism workshop was paraphrasing. One of the things that APA does distinguish is that paraphrasing is more desirable than direct quotes. It kind of wants to show that you are able to take in the information, kind of synthesize it, and then describe it out in your own words while still giving credit. So, if you do need to pull direct quotes from the literature, that's fine. But APA does specify that paraphrasing is more desirable, especially as you get higher and higher in your academic level, like undergrad versus graduate school, PhD. It really is showing you're able to engage with the scholarly material because you don't want just like quote after quote after quote. It needs to show that you're kind of engaging and able to present the information you engage with through your own words, while also giving credit. So in-text citations, they typically follow an author date method. So it's typically the author's last name and year of publication should appear in the text. And then a complete reference will appear in the reference list at the end of the paper. So this is really simple and straightforward, easy, especially when you have, maybe one author. So for example, Smith 2003 claimed, that's really straightforward. Author's name is provided and the year of publication. Now, APA does give you different options on how you want to format these citations, either through the narrative citation, which is where you do include the author as part of the narrative in your in the body of your text. So Smith appears outside of parentheses, the year of publication appears within parentheses, and then you can carry on with the narration of the information. The second option is to provide a parenthetical citation. So you can just paraphrase or provide the information, not necessarily directly referring to the author, but then you can provide the author's name and the date of publication within parentheses. So that's called a parenthetical citation. And with a parenthetical citation, you just separate the author and date by a comma. Now, direct quotes can also be used with these two different citation types, narrative or parenthetical. And so with a direct quote, you would just want to include the page number or location indicator. This may be different for non-traditional or like non-print work. So for, say, a video, you would need to have a timestamp for where the quote started. Sometimes with websites, they don't have page numbers, so you would count the paragraph. So like if your quote comes from the third paragraph, you do para 3. But if it's kind of a traditional like print where there's pages, so book or article, you would just provide the page number. So here it'd be P54, so indicating page 54. So we have our narrative citation, Smith, year in parentheses, and then you're quoting from that source, indicating the location, page number. Or for your parenthetical, it looks pretty much similar to what we did before, but after the year of publication, we just add the location, so page 54. In some scenarios too, you might have sources that have no publication date. In that case, you are using n.d. It literally stands for no date. This is common, especially with web content. There might not be a publication date available. Continuing on with in-text citations. So again, I mentioned that it follows an author date format. So it doesn't really change based on the source type, but it might, your citations might look a little bit different based on the number of authors you have. So for multiple authors of 2 authors, you would join the author's name with the word "and" as part of a narrative citation in the text. And then if for parenthetical citations, use an ampersand sign between the 2 last names when you refer to them. So in our example here, we have Maldonado and Hernandez. We have the actual word "and." And then in the parenthetical, we just use the ampersand symbol to separate the 2 authors' last names. And in some occasions, you might have multiple works within the same citation. It might be something like several studies have found that remote work has really strained our sense of community during COVID-19. And in that case, you would do, you would list all the citations and you would put them in alphabetical order, separating each citation by a semicolon. So Ford is a single author who's published in 2003. And then Waters and Daniel, you have multiple authors here separated by the ampersand, and they published in 2006. But these 2 sources are separated by a semicolon so that the reader understands that these are 2 different sources. They're just kind of, they both come to a similar finding or summary. One of the changes with from the 6th edition to the 7th edition of APA is that now any work with 3 or more authors only includes 1 surname, so usually the first surname listed on the publication, followed by et al, and then the year. So this kind of cuts down on unnecessary text within APA. APA is all about being very concise. So for our narrative example, Hall et al, year of publication, it was still within parentheses and you can continue to paraphrase. Versus a parenthetical citation, we have Hall et al. There's always a period after the all to show that it's a abbreviation. And then there's still a comma separating the author and the year of publication. So again, this is new to the 7th edition. Now it's just for any citation with a source that has 3 or more authors every time you cite that source. One of the other things that APA prefers is that you use primary sources. So when we talk about primary sources, that means it's coming from the original researcher or author of a study, in the case usually of social science disciplines. If you are using a source where, say, I've written an article and I keep talking about Piaget this, Piaget that, you would want to go to the source if you want to cite Piaget and Piaget's theories and approaches to education and pedagogy. If it's out of print or it wasn't translated into English because Piaget did not originally write in English, APA does allow that as a reason to cite as a secondary source. But again, you really want to go to that primary source where the original information was coming from so you can see the full text of it. If you can't access the first edition or the primary source where the original information is presented, then you can cite a source as a secondary source. So in our example here, the article I have found is by Thompson. It was published in 2014. Thompson is referring to Piaget's vision for education, paraphrasing from Piaget. And so for my parenthetical citation, I can have as cited in Thompson 2014. If I don't have Piaget as part of the narrative and I'm just talking about pedagogical theory, I still would want to indicate that that pedagogical theory comes from Piaget and it's cited in a source or a publication by Thompson. And it's a more recent or contemporary publication from Piaget's original work. I know this is kind of like an abstract topic or like an abstract idea. So, you know, you'll see it in practice, and we have some additional examples on our APA guide. So I can point out that link towards the end of the presentation. So far in our examples, we've had individual authors or authors with surnames as our for our in-text citations. In some scenarios, you might use a source that doesn't have a specific author, but if it's published by a company or an organization, they step in as author. So for example, if you're doing research and using the Department of Education's website to gather statistics or information about school achievement or whatever the topic may be, if the publication doesn't identify an individual author, then the Department of Education would become the author. So again, the narrative and parenthetical citations look very similar to what we've seen before. It's just the Department of Education, that title or that entity becomes the author. So you can see it both in a narrative and parenthetical citation. In some scenarios, these groups or organizations that you're using as authors can be abbreviated. And if the abbreviation is familiar or readily recognizable, then APA recommends you format accordingly. So for example, we're very familiar, if we've been paying attention to the news for the last year, with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that they're the CDC. If I'm referring to sources like current vaccine distribution numbers or percentage by state, and I cite CDC as my source. The first time I cite them as a source, I actually need to spell out the full name of the organization for both a narrative as well as parenthetical citation. For a narrative citation, I would just add the abbreviation CDC to my parentheses here with the year. For parenthetical citation, I'd actually put the abbreviation in brackets, but then any subsequent reference to that source or citation for that source, I could just use CDC. So again, with APA, it's really condensing unnecessary information, making it easier for the reader to just get to the meat of what it is that you're trying to say, rather than spending a lot of time with your eyeballs having to look at that name over and over and over again if it's a source that you're using often. So that is an option, or that is available for formatting if you are using sources that can be abbreviated. I'll just mention, even though we aren't going into references, that when you do create a reference for an organization that you've abbreviated in the text, you don't need to provide the abbreviation in the reference list. You are just referring to the full name of the organization. So Centers for Disease Control and Prevention would be the author of the source in your reference page. Now, if a work has no identifiable author or organization, then you end up citing the title of the work in addition to the year. So for sources that are articles, chapters from books, web pages, you're going to put double quotations around the title, which we see here in this example, this parenthetical citation. The article or web page is called Study Finds, and we have double quotation marks around the title. Versus if you are citing a book or a periodical, so like a journal, and it's like a specific journal, not an article within a journal. So say like Time Magazine, for example, you would italicize the title. So it just shows the distinction between the source type is how that's formatted. Now, if a work is actually designated as being written by anonymous, you would cite anonymous as the author, and then that would also be reflected in your reference. But unless it's specifically stated it's written by anonymous, you would refer back to the title for your citation. With legal entities, we're typically using the title of the work and followed by the year. So for example, Supreme Court cases, Brown versus the Board of Education, that would be the title, or the title of the legislation or the legal entity, and that would be what you use in your citation. So, and again, we have more examples and on our APA research guide. So that's the conclusion of formatting different citations based on different scenarios. I did want to touch on block quotes. I know I said that APA prefers that you paraphrase, and that's correct. However, if you do quote and it's a long quote, so a quotation containing 40 or more words, that typically has to be formatted as a block quote. So block quotes don't use quotation marks to enclose the quote. Unless you have a quote within the quote, then you would use quotation marks for that portion. But overall, you're not using quotation marks typically for block quotes. Another difference with block quotes is that you place a period at the end of the quote rather than after the citation. And on the next slide, I have examples so you can have a visual of what that might look like. Block quotes are also, they start on a new line and they're typically indented about 1/2 inch from the left margin. If you are quoting multiple paragraphs as part of your block quote, any additional paragraph will have an additional indentation about 1/2 inch. And with block quotes, they are double spaced throughout the entire quotation, similar to just the body of your text. With APA, your text should be double spaced throughout. So there is no difference with block quotes. I see sometimes students making that adjustment, and that is not necessary. So in this slide, we have two different examples of a block quote. One uses a narrative citation. So we've already identified the author as well as the year of publication. And then we go on to quote directly from that source, more than 40 words. It's indented. It's all, this whole block of quote is indented. So this is how we see the it lining up with the margin. This is still the left margin. This whole block is indented 1/2 inch, period at the end of the quote, and then no period after the citation for the page number or location identifier. We have an additional example below. This is a block quote that has a parenthetical citation, very similar, again, same indent of the whole block of quote. There's no use of quotation marks in this block quote, period at the end of the quote and not after the citation. So that's what a block quote looks like for those who aren't familiar or feel like a little, they need a refresher on the topic. This presentation provides links to some of our APA resources, including the APA style or the APA 7th edition research guide that we have created. We do have the APA manual available in our physical libraries with the call number. Right now with home delivery, you can request them, but if they're checked out, we aren't recalling materials. So if someone beats you to it, who knows when we'll get it back. We are trying to observe due dates, but also with the closures, there have been extensions provided for loans. We also have a subscription to Academic Writer. It was formerly APA Style Central. It's a product from APA. So it combines lots of different learning and teaching tools. And it also has a full integration of the manual, like embedded. It doesn't allow you to read the full manual as like an ebook, but it has different sections. So it'll have sections on headers and running head and things like that. But it also allows you to create content in this platform, and it builds in like the required formatting. So it'll make sure that your margins are correct. If you pull in citations, it'll format for you as well. So it's a really nice tool available to students for your use. I've also provided links to the APA style website. This replaced the 6th edition's blog. It's a little more condensed and streamlined, but it has a lot of really useful information. Of course, Al Purdue is another good resource that often students are referred to by faculty. They know that name, and they've provided a lot of resources with APA formatting. And then I've also found a step-by-step guide for APA style student papers, because I did mention that there are some components that are different with student papers in the newest edition, so not having a running head. So this really is geared to target students and how to format papers following APA style. So it goes beyond kind of what I've talked about. It covers margins and other things like that. So the last thing I have is just an activity, and we'll pause the recording for the activity, but this link just provides you with the opportunity to kind of like test your knowledge now that you've completed the workshop. And of course, we can take questions if there are any questions beforehand.
Yes, Kelsey, there is a question.
Okay.
I believe I answered.
So you can send any follow-up questions to this email. Again, we have a link to the slides, and we have additional workshops. So for example, we'll have a reference workshop on this Thursday at noon. Pacific time. So it's kind of like this workshop, but focusing just on reference formatting of different source types. We also have additional workshops coming up on search strategies and using specific databases such as ERIC or PsycInfo. We have some citation management workshops coming up as well. So there's lots of stuff that we're still offering. And we offer multiple dates and times. So if one date and time doesn't work, hopefully another one does. But we do record all of our sessions. So you know, that's also available. We post them online.